The first mistake the neighborhood patrol guy made was stepping onto my cedar porch and calling the mountain a regulated area. The second was flicking his laminated badge like it held power over the wind. The third was hanging around long enough to hear the distant growl. 30 engines, 30 smirks. My cousins from the service cutting up the canyon on steel gray Harleys like a rolling thunderhead sent to wash pretenders off the map. Names Evan Rourke, mild-mannered systems analyst by trade, recluse by choice. I bought a triangular cabin at the edge of Black Needle Bluff because ravens don't gossip and evergreens don't care what color you stain your deck. Half a mile downhill through the fir trees squats Pinegate Summit, a homeowners enclave with a gate that thinks it's Fort Knox, and cameras that twitch like caffeinated squirrels. Their self-appointed monarch is Janet Cranwell, mid-50s, hair lacquered into architectural stability, silk scarf worth more than my entire grocery budget, and a temperament best described as citrus on a paper cut. She pilots a pearl-white SUV with a vanity plate reading Obame, which about sums up her doctrine. My place isn't part of their kingdom, not even close. I'm a solid quarter-mile past their jurisdiction, up where the county road dissolves into gravel and the mail truck needs chains just to survive December. But Janet's sense of geography leans more toward conquest than cartography. She's been mailing me notices about my non-compliant rustic FOD and unauthorized campfire aroma ever since I moved in 3 years ago. The first letter arrived by certified mail, typed in bold uppercase, declaring that my natural stain siding violated the approved earth tone palette initiative. I used that letter to light a real campfire, probably breaking another clause about improper combustion of official correspondence. The thing about Janet is that she used to manage a claims department somewhere before retiring early to pursue her true calling, making everyone else's lives exhausting. She ran for HOA president on a platform promising enhanced conformity and squeaked out a win over some poor guy whose only campaign promise was to repave the basketball court. Within weeks, she had birthed 17 new committees, including the Aesthetic Cohesion Board, the Vegetation Consistency Council, and my personal favorite, the Sound Serenity Task Force. She once slapped a $500 fine on a family because their retrievers dared to bark above her decibel threshold during a thunderstorm. When the letters failed to intimidate me, Janet escalated to performance art that would have impressed a street mime. She erected a so-called neighborhood watch checkpoint at the fork, where the county road meets their gated drive, 2 plastic chairs, a wobbling card table, and a faded cooler labeled security in vinyl letters that screamed 7th grade project. Her loyal recruits, 2 retirees named Don and Marty, both were former mall security veterans who still treated cargo shorts like regulation gear and their mirrored shades like barriers against reality. Janet bragged on the neighborhood app, which I only know exists because my neighbor Tommy screenshots her wildest posts declaring, "We will enforce compliance across the entire Bluff District." Bluff District, as if she ruled a province instead of tormenting retirees and freelancers who just wanted peace and Wi-Fi. Then came the drones, tiny, buzzing tattletales that sounded like hornets arguing about their purpose in life. They hovered over my firewood like debt collectors, circled my chicken coop taking pictures of what Janet called unregistered livestock, and one spent 20 minutes filming my hammock, which apparently violated a freshly invented temporary structure ordinance. I started keeping a slingshot on the porch, not to shoot them down, just to make them anxious. Turns out, drones have top-tier obstacle avoidance and bottom-tier courage. That Saturday morning, I was sipping coffee and watching elk graze the meadow when 2 men in black polos and tactical shorts trudged up my private road, clipboards in hand, tape measure dangling, radiating the moral authority of a parking ticket. They were sweating through their polarized lenses, which is impressive in its own sad way. The taller one, sporting a patchy beard that looked glued on from dryer lint, puffed his chest and declared himself Neighborhood Enforcement Division, tapping his laminated badge like it came straight from a sacred vault. The badge, by the way, still had the online shipping logo faintly visible under the lamination. He announced they were there to assess setback compliance, structure elevation, and possible violations. I pointed toward the ridgeline and said, "My setbacks are called mountains. My height limits are called gravity." He claimed I was out of alignment with bluff regulations. I asked him to show me these so-called bluff regulations. He shuffled through his clipboard until he pulled out a sheet that looked like someone had played bureaucratic Mad Libs with zoning laws. I reminded him that I wasn't part of their homeowners circle. He replied, in a tone dripping with condescension, "That's exactly what outsiders always say," as if being beyond their jurisdiction was a delusion instead of a GPS-confirmed fact. The shorter guy, meanwhile, had a GoPro strapped to his forehead, like he was about to leap off my balcony for a documentary. He began narrating into his phone. Subject is exhibiting aggressive posture while standing on his own porch. Subject appears to be holding a potential projectile disguised as a coffee mug. Subject's flannel pattern indicates probable anti-authority tendencies. I asked if subject wanted a slice of banana bread my neighbor had dropped off. He actually hesitated, eyes flickering toward the kitchen, before the tall one jabbed him back into character. Then they started advancing toward my door like they were on a warrant. I stepped into their path with the kind of relaxed stubbornness you develop from years of dealing with door-to-door energy salesmen and lost hikers. The tall one reached for his radio, which was really just a $30 walkie-talkie knockoff from the internet, and declared he was initiating Code Amber. I asked what Code Amber meant. He said it signified resistance to procedural authority. I said that sounded made up. He said, "All procedures start that way," which, honestly, was the most profound thing I'd heard from a fake security officer. So I called 911, reported 2 trespassers impersonating enforcement officials, complete with fake badges and attempted forced entry. The dispatcher, clearly stifling laughter, promised to send a deputy right away. While we stood there in the world's most uncomfortable standoff, the shorter guy began filming my yard with sweeping, over-dramatic movements like he was shooting the pilot episode of Subdivision Patrol. He zoomed in on my compost bin and whispered, "Unauthorized organic breakdown in progress," then panned to my solar panels, mumbling about illicit energy production. He even spent a full 5 minutes documenting my garden gnome, which held a tiny sign reading, "Trespassers will be mulched." That's when Janet herself appeared on the trail wearing wedge sandals that clearly weren't designed for mountain terrain. She was power walking like she was late to a coup, waving a rolled up paper like a sword of suburbia. She was shouting about collective easement, jurisdiction, and brandishing what turned out to be a printout of a Wikipedia article on property law. Her voice echoed through the forest, startling 2 deer and a family of rabbits that had been minding their own business. She ranted that my unsightly wood stove vent could reduce property values for homeowners located a zip code away, that my unlicensed fire pit posed a danger to the entire mountain biome, and that my cabin's outdated wilderness motif was an act of architectural hostility against the modern alpine aesthetic her board had decreed. I asked her to point out where my property appeared in their association documents. She unfurled a map that looked like it had been drawn with a crayon after 3 glasses of Chardonnay. My land was labeled Future Development Zone, which was impressive, considering I'd owned it 5 years before their project even existed. She warned me that private enforcement measures were being activated, grinning like she'd rehearsed the line in a mirror all morning. I said, "Great. Introduce them to the sheriff when he gets here." She smirked, venom in every syllable. "We won't need the sheriff," she said. "We have our own enforcement procedures." Then came the thunder, not from the cloudless sky, but from the canyon below. Mechanical thunder, the kind that shakes your ribcage and sets off every car alarm in town. My cousins Rico, Ty, and a dozen of their friends from the veteran riders group we camp with each summer rolling up the ridge on roaring chrome bikes like a summer storm with purpose. They came around the bend as a rolling wave of chrome, leather, and unapologetic horsepower. The engines rumbled, low like big cats debating whether the intruders were worth the calories. These weren't your weekend cosplay bikers. These were men who'd driven armored trucks through sandstorms, jumped out of aircraft for paychecks, and earned their patches in places where neighborhood disputes meant not getting shelled during lunch. Rico, who'd spent 8 years as a military mechanic and now writes haikus about carburetors, pulled off his helmet. He gave the cargo shorts task force a calm, slow smile, the kind that makes your stomach wonder if it's time to run or apologize. In a voice that was both polite and immovable, he asked if they were lost or if they needed a GPS back to the nearest shopping mall. Suddenly, the shiny badges looked less like symbols of authority and more like props from a clearance bin. Don instinctively tried to cover his with his clipboard. Janet attempted to square her shoulders, but her stance collapsed on impact like a sugar cookie meeting hot tea. She sputtered something about this being official HOA business and claimed these men had no jurisdiction. Ty, who did 3 tours overseas and now teaches high school history, pointed to the wooden property post and said, "So does that. Says this is Evan's land, not yours." The riders spread out, no threats, no bluster, just presence. A dozen living reminders that the wilderness respects the prepared, and the prepared respect boundaries. They parked in a loose semicircle, turning the clearing into a steel and chrome amphitheater for the farce unfolding on my porch. The 2 security officers backed up instinctively, as if shepherded by invisible sheepdogs. Marty tripped over a planter my mom had given me, sending soil and petunias flying. Don tried to help him up without dropping his clipboard or dignity. He failed on both counts. Somewhere up in the trees, a woodpecker let out a sound suspiciously close to laughter. Or maybe that was just the mountain itself, enjoying the show. One of the riders, a mountain of a man nicknamed Bulldozer, and for good reason, at the 2 polo-clad patrolmen and asked, "These the entertainers somebody ordered?" Even Janet's bulletproof hairstyle seemed to lose some structural integrity after that. Moments later, the county deputy rolled up in a swirl of dust and disbelief, arriving just in time to witness Janet attempting a citizen's arrest on me for disturbing the peace. She actually reached for my wrist while reciting something that sounded like it had been copied straight from a search result titled, "How to Detain Someone Legally." The deputy's eyebrows shot north and didn't come back. I handed him my property deed, a certified parcel map from the county recorder's office, and a USB stick containing drone footage of their little flying spies crossing my boundary line, plus screenshots of Janet's messages calling my home a hostile structure and threatening to have it condemned through her friends at City Hall, which was particularly amusing since we were well outside city limits. The deputy Reynolds, according to his namatag, turned to the cargo shorts duo and asked, "You 2 licensed security officers?" They offered up their badges like trick or treaters, hoping their haul might count as legitimate candy. The deputy squinted at the fine print. "For novelty use only." He asked if they'd presented themselves as official security. They nodded. He asked if they'd attempted to enter my house. They exchanged a look that could have been captioned synchronized panic. Finally, he asked if the HOA had hired them for enforcement duties. Janet opened her mouth, but Reynolds raised a hand, the kind that had written 1,000 citations and tolerated 0 nonsense. He cited the 2 men for impersonating licensed officers and criminal trespass, then wrote Janet up for unauthorized enforcement activity and conspiracy to commit trespass. After a long sigh, he keyed his radio and called in a 10-16 for supervisor backup because, as he put it, the whole situation reeked of liability stew served with a fresh garnish of lawsuit sauce. Rico quietly helped Marty recover what was left of his dignity from the planter disaster, even offering him a bandana to wipe potting soil off his tactical shorts. Moments later, the supervisor arrived, a sergeant whose expression screamed, "I did not sign up for this." She glanced once at the riders, once at Janet rambling about her expansion zone theory, and once at the novelty badges. Then she delivered the sentence that reset the entire ridge. With a voice that could have made a drill instructor stand at attention, she ordered Janet to step away from property you do not own before obstruction. Charges get added to your souvenir list. 2 months later, after the lawyers feasted and the court system had its dessert, Pinegate Summit HOA emerged with a brand new board, a fresh attorney who actually understood boundary law, and a newfound reverence for county lines that existed long before their developer ever drew a sales brochure. The county fined them $30,000 for erecting an unpermitted checkpoint, running an illegal surveillance program, and my personal favorite, impersonating a public authority. The state tacked on another $20,000 for operating unregistered drones that violated multiple privacy statutes. The 2 fake security officers each got $5,000 fines and 6 months of probation. And Janet Deere, overzealous Janet, struck a plea deal that sentenced her to 250 hours of community service cleaning, graffiti, and scrubbing restrooms at the Veterans Trailhead, the same one my cousins sponsor for their annual charity ride. She also received 12 months probation, a $10,000 fine, and a restraining order keeping her 500 feet from my property line. The HOA had to pay to replace my crushed planter, resurvey the property boundaries at a cost of $8,000, and install trailhead signage that reads, "Private parcels begin here. Read twice. Trespassers will be prosecuted." The judge, a retired Marine who seemed to savor every second, added one more flourish. Janet was to write a 5,000-word essay on property rights and the limits of HOA jurisdiction, to be published in the local paper at her own expense. When he announced the 250 hours of service, Janet's face turned the color of sour milk. When he mentioned the essay, she gasped so loudly the court reporter froze mid-keystroke. And when he brought up the restraining order, she swayed like a tree in a windstorm, her lawyer grabbing her elbow just to keep her upright.